Hello, everyone. Welcome to Alan Hu Foundation Mental Health Lecture Series. I'm Chi-Ching Hu, co-founder of Alan Hu Foundation and host for your webinar. Today, Dr. Andrew Fuligni will present leveraging the opportunity of adolescence to promote mental health. First off, I want to thank Mental Health Association for Chinese Communities for providing simultaneous Chinese interpretation. And thank you, Ida Xiao, for Chinese interpretation. Alan Hu Foundation's mission is to promote mental health, raise awareness, and remove stigma surrounding psychiatric disorders, and support fundamental research for cures. Please consider making a gift to Alan Hu Foundation by scanning the QR code on the slide or using the donation link in the chat box. Thank you for supporting our programs to promote mental health. Today, it is our great honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Andrew Fuligni. Dr. Fuligni is a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and the Biobehavioral Sciences and Department of Psychology at UCLA. His research focuses on the interaction between sociocultural experiences and the biobehavioral development during adolescence. As a co-director of the UCLA Center for Developing Adolescent, he works to translate and disseminate the science of adolescence to policymakers and practitioners to support efforts that promote the healthy development of diverse youth. In this webinar, Dr. Fuligni will discuss how the unique developmental opportunities and needs of adolescents can be best supported in order to promote the ability of diverse youth to thrive. Following the presentation, it will be a Q&A session. Please submit your questions using Zoom Q&A function. The presentation is for educational purpose only and is not intended for medical diagnosis. If you have any persistent symptoms, please seek for professional help. With that, I'm going to turn to Dr. Fuligni. Welcome, Dr. Fuligni.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's an honor to be invited to speak with you tonight. Your organization is doing such important work to highlight the importance of mental health during the adolescent years. And I'm grateful to have the opportunity to participate in this ongoing discussion that you're having with practitioners, communities, and with youth themselves. I'm going to share my screen to get started. All good?
Yes, I can see it.
Looks good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I am a scientist. I'm not a clinician, but I have been studying many different aspects of adolescent development for almost 3 decades now. I've looked at, along with my students and my colleagues, we've examined psychological well-being. We've looked at physical health, family and peer relationships. We've done work on cultural traditions, discrimination, sleep, and brain development among youth from diverse cultural backgrounds, including those from immigrant families, and a lot of work among youth from the Asian American community and from the Latino community as well. At this point in my career, I have the wonderful opportunity to serve as the co-executive director of the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescent. And our center is a fairly unique university center. Our goal is not necessarily to conduct primary original research ourselves, although I still do that. And our co-executive director, Adriana Galvan at UCLA, also does the same herself. But our goal as the center really is to focus on science communication. And that is to translate and communicate the science of adolescence to policymakers, practitioners, and the general public. Our goal is to share the science that tells us that adolescence is a time of tremendous opportunity for the healthy development of youth themselves and for what they can contribute to our communities. And in doing so, we hope to increase investments into supporting adolescents in multiple sectors in our society, the mental health sector, educational sector, out-of-school programming, all other aspects of the community in which adolescents spend their time, as well as to offer specific science-based insights into how we can best meet their unique developmental needs. Now, through the efforts of the Alan Hu Foundation and many others, adolescent mental health is finally getting the public attention that it deserves. It had been talked about here and there over the years, the last couple of decades, but clearly within the last few years, it has really exploded on the scene as a topic of major conversation here in the United States and frankly, around the world as I talk to my colleagues in different countries. In the United States, this was recently amplified by the Surgeon General's advisory on adolescent mental health that some of you may be familiar with. If you're not familiar with it, I strongly encourage you to take a look at it. It's written in a very accessible manner. And in that advisory by the Surgeon General noted how many of our youth are not getting the attention and the services that they need, and that promoting adolescent mental health requires a society-wide investment and commitment to promoting health. Now, one thing that is most striking about this report to me is that the Surgeon General talks both about what we need to do in order to help youth who are in crisis. And as we all know, there are nowhere near enough services to help those who are in crisis in our communities today. And that needs to be dramatically increased. But he both talks about the importance of meeting those needs of those who are in crisis, but also what we need to do to support youth before that crisis occurs. What we can do as communities, as families, as schools, as societies to help promote thriving youth and thriving mental health. This second point is the focus of my talk today. What does the developmental science of adolescence tell us about how we can best promote mental health, positive mental health in our youth and enable them to thrive? And we at the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescent believe that any discussion of adolescent mental health, if we're talking about it in policy circles, if you're seeing articles in the media, if we're having discussions in our community, should really include a focus on this. What are the opportunities provided by this special time of adolescence, and how can we best meet the unique needs of this exciting period of life in order to promote thriving youth? So that's why I'm here today, is to talk and to tell you what the exciting science, developmental science of adolescence is telling us about how adolescence is a time of remarkable growth and remarkable opportunity. As we all know, adolescence is a period of rapid growth. And when we talk about adolescence, we are talking about the ages between 10 and 25. It's quite a wide age range. That's why many people find it important and useful to break it down into different stages of adolescence. And sometimes we talk about early adolescence, and those are the ages from 9 to 12, roughly. And in the United States, that corresponds to grades 5th through 7th. We then talk about middle adolescence, which covers the age span from ages 13 to 17. And that covers roughly sort of the end of middle school to nearing the end of high school. And then we talk about late adolescence, the ages of 18 to 24, or the post-high school years. And what's interesting about the adolescent period in contemporary society, it is a much longer period of development, right? So we're talking about puberty these days in high-resource countries can begin as early as ages 9 or 10 for girls. It averages about a year later for boys. And then when we increasingly have the availability of post-secondary education, we have many more youth attending college today and not really beginning their careers until the early to mid-20s. And even those who don't go on to college are actually engaging in different types of occupations and don't really begin their careers until the mid-20s. We really talk about this period of adolescence these days of going from almost from ages 9 to 10 to almost 24 years of age. So that's almost like a 15-year period. But what's remarkable about this period, even though we break it down into different components and they represent different things that are happening, whether it's different changes that are happening biologically or the kinds of schools you attend or what's happening in your social life, which really captures adolescence across this 15-year span is that it is a period of rapid growth when we discover, learn, and adapt to the world around us. And the science is telling us when we look at the developing brain, when we look at developing psychological capacities, when we look at what's happening in the social world, what it really is, it's a period of remarkable discovery a period of important learning and a period of important adaptation where we learn about the world around us. We try to figure out how we fit into that world around us, does it take in order to succeed and be a good member and a functioning member of that world around us. Very important work happening during this 15-year period. As I was saying, it's a period of change and discovery. So we experience a range of physical, social, emotional, and behavioral changes. Physically, we start going through the period of puberty. That period of puberty, although we think about it as one discrete stage sometimes, publicly or colloquially, we think of, well, someone's going through puberty. It lasts a couple of years and then they're done with puberty. And in actuality, puberty begins with some hormonal changes that occur in the body before you're even 9 years of age. It could begin as early as 5, 6, 7 years of age. We just don't see those happening. All we see are the physical changes that take place for puberty, whether it's physical growth or body hair, other kinds of physical changes that are associated with whether or not you're biologically female or biologically male. And as we know, those physical changes themselves are also going to be happening throughout this period, anywhere from 10 to 25 years. Social changes take place. We have dramatic changes in the social world in which we spend our time. We have emotional changes that are taking place. We experience an increasingly large range and expansive range of emotions. We feel these emotions more strongly. We have a number of behavioral changes. We're increasingly able to do more complex physical things. We have more complicated cognitive abilities. And what we're doing is that we're experiencing a lot of these changes at the same time. And what we are doing is discovering what these changes mean for us biologically, socially, who we are, how we fit in. And at the same time, the communities around us, our families, our friends, our schools, our neighborhoods, are also trying to figure out and discover what these changes mean for that individual and for us as a member of a community. Our relationships expand to include new people. We gradually expand our social world. We're no longer just focused upon the family. We increasingly spend more and more time with friends and adults who are from outside of the family. We increasingly have more complex relationships with our peers. We develop romantic interests with romantic feelings with those around us. It just becomes a very dramatic expansion of the social world. And again, we're discovering what those changes mean for us and for the world around us. Because we're expanding the social world, we are learning to make decisions and develop autonomy. And the word autonomy here we don't really mean to imply that you're working to be on your own. Instead, you're taking a sense of agency. You're taking more of a role in making decisions about your everyday decisions in your life. Those of you who are family members here and who are parents will appreciate the fact that it will often begin with wanting to have agency about the kinds of clothes you wear, the kinds of things that you do with your time, the shows you want to watch, the kinds of games you want to play. It increasingly will involve the kinds of friends that you want to have, who you want to spend time with. Increasingly will involve how much time you will spend outside of the home, what your curfew is going to be, how you're going to spend your time, what kinds of activities you're going to be involved in. And again, it doesn't mean this is pure independence. It doesn't mean that we want to do this by ourselves, but increasingly, as we go through adolescence, we develop this sense of agency, which sometimes is called autonomy, in which we learn to make decisions and take responsibility for these decisions. And we also explore identities and become more fully engaged in our communities. And when we talk about identity, we are both talking about perhaps our self-identity, that is who we are, what are we like, what's our personality going to be like, what kinds of interests do we have, what kind of clothes are we going to wear, who our friends are going to be, but they also involve what are sometimes called social identities. And those really have to be, refer to where do we fit in socially in the world? Sometimes it could be, are you an athlete? Are you not? Are you more of a student or not? Are you someone who's interested in this particular kind of music or that kind of music? What kind of capacities do you have? How do you want to be considered by others? How is the rest of the world going to be seeing you? It also has to do with social identities like your gender or your ethnicity or your culture. What does it mean to be, if I identify as male, what does it mean to be male or female? Or if I identify as Black or as Chinese or Chinese American, what does that mean to me? How does that, what kinds of qualities does that involve? What does that mean in terms of the different types of communities I'm going to engage with? So really, altogether, this is really to represent this idea that there are tremendous changes happening during this period. And the whole important part of this period is a period of discovery. What do these changes mean for us? And how does the community around us start to see us? And how do they then discover who we are, who we're going to be based upon the changes that we go through? Our developing brains are built for these changes. So I'm going to spend some time now talking about adolescent brain development and the role it plays in these changes. The field of adolescent developmental neuroscience has really been a young field. It's only been around for about 30 years or so. It's exploded dramatically in the last 2 decades. We had early understandings. Sometimes we were wrong. Sometimes we had early views of the adolescent brain. Sometimes they were corrected. We have a much richer understanding of the adolescent brain today than we even had 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. So how are our adolescent brains built for these changes that I've just been describing? During adolescence, there are some fundamental changes that are happening. And without going into a very deep dive into talk at the cellular level and talking about what's going on in the adolescent brain, I'm going to discuss some basic concepts of what is going on. First of all, there's more plasticity before the adolescent years and during the adolescent years in adolescent brain development. And what this means is that because of that plasticity, we have increased sensitivity to our environments. And what we do when we're developing our brain, and this happens during prenatally, and then it happens during infancy, and it happens throughout childhood, but it also, you have these moments of plasticity that are particularly significant at particular times of childhood. And adolescence is one of those periods. And what seems to be happening is that the adolescent brain, and just before adolescence, is sort of developing a lot of neuronal growth and a lot of connections between different neurons and creating a lot of synapses within the brain in order to allow for plasticity. And these developments are set up to prepare the brain to be sensitive to the environment, to pay attention to the environment, to be sensitive to different kinds of inputs that are going on so that we can be plastic, so that we can be responsive to these changes that are taking place in the environments. Interestingly, there is some very emergent neuroscience work that's very exciting, that's suggesting that there may be this new window of plasticity that is happening during the teenage years that might allow children who have gone through very significant early adversity early on in life, earlier on in childhood, to perhaps recalibrate brain development and perhaps have another chance to recalibrate their development during the years of adolescence and perhaps help them to recover from and to change their developmental trajectories from those that were developed early on in life due to some very significant early adversities. So we have a very plastic brain during the adolescent years. Our neural connections refine and become more efficient. And so as implied a little bit earlier, is that we have some growth in neurons, we have some growth in multiple synaptic connections and networks that are being developed during just before adolescence or in early adolescence. But what is striking is what happens during the adolescent years as we go through the teenage years and into the early 20s. What is going on is a lot of pruning. And in many ways, the gray matter of the brain, which really represents the synapses and the neurons of the brain, tends to reduce during the teenage years because these connections are being refined and becoming more efficient. So one helpful way to think about this when I try to talk about this is to think about if you go to a new city or to a new environment and you have a new job and you need to figure out how you're going to get to that new job. And this is, of course, before the age of Google Maps, if you will. What you would do is you would try it out different ways to get to that new job. Some ways are going to be shorter than others. Some are going to be more trafficky than others. I know in the Bay Area and clearly here in LA, the sheer distance of the pathway doesn't necessarily mean the time. You need to understand traffic flows and so on and so on. You're going to try all of these different routes early on. Over time, you're going to figure out which one or two routes are most efficient, quicker, and get you there the fastest with the least amount of energy. And then you're going to focus on those routes, and gradually you're going to forget about those other paths that you took and explored to get to the workplace in the first place. In some ways, that's what's going on in the brain. We have a lot of connections going on and a lot of multiple pathways by which these signals could go. And over time, we are pruning these things in order to be more efficient, get the signals to go more quickly, to get more complex interactions between different regions of our brain, and to use up less energy as we're doing so. As you know, probably the human brain is the most energy-intensive organ we have in the body. The other thing that's notable about adolescence is that our motivation and reward systems are particularly active. So during the adolescent years, dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that is particularly relevant in the motivational and reward systems, tends to be circulating at particularly high levels. The hormonal changes that happen during puberty also tend to stimulate more activity within these motivational and reward systems. And we are uniquely skilled at exploratory and flexible learning. So these motivational and reward systems, these are the systems that get you excited, that get you to want to do something, that will tend to be very active when you receive a reward, or when you see that chocolate that you really want to have, or you have that chocolate, or if you see someone walking down the school hallway in which for whom you have romantic feelings, those systems will tend to be more active. But what's fascinating is that these systems, these motivation reward systems, are the same systems that are focused upon learning. And because of that, we are uniquely skilled at exploratory and flexible learning during the adolescent years. Because of these active motivational reward and learning systems, we are particularly good at exploring different opportunities, being flexible in our learning strategies, and then figuring out which strategies are most effective. And there are these fascinating studies being done in which you present learning tasks to, say, a 7-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 30-year-old. The 15-year-old is one that is going to explore all the different ways that they could try to figure out and solve this problem. They'll explore a wider array of strategies in order to figure out the best strategy in order to learn that particular task or to solve that particular problem. And they'll do more of that than the 7-year-old, and then more of that than even the 30-year-old. The 30-year-old, and if you're my age, even more so, we'll try one or two strategies. If it seems to work, we'll try it and we'll stick with that strategy again and again and again. So together, what is happening is that the adolescent brain, because of plasticity and these connections and the motivation and reward system and the exploratory flexible learning, seems to be designed for us to discover and explore the world around us. At the same time, social and cultural factors also play a role. They play a role in brain development. They play a role in psychological development. They play a role in behavioral development and physical health. Social structures and systems can both facilitate and impede positive adolescent development. If they are supportive of this need for adolescents to explore and to learn and discover the world around them, if they are supporting the resources that they need to get there, then they will facilitate positive adolescent brain development, positive adolescent psychological and behavioral development. If they do not provide these opportunities, if they are under-resourced, or if they are even hostile and present discrimination or systemic racism or systemic barriers to you or to groups of adolescents because of your income, ethnicity, immigrant status, what have you, they can also impede adolescent development. So it's not all about the brain. The brain is going to be interacting with these social structures and systems. Diverse youth and communities have unique cultural strengths. Many of the things that I will be talking about later that are important for adolescent development, the kinds of opportunities we need to provide to them, All of our different cultural groups have unique strengths that provide those to youth in unique kinds of ways. So when we talk about the importance of supportive adults, traditions of familism or filial piety or supporting the family, or the importance of extended family, or knowing who you are culturally and ethnically and who that means, what that means to you, whether it be your religion or your faith, all of these strengths provide the kind of scaffolding and the kinds of opportunities for healthy adolescent development. And many times they are unique to the particular cultural group in the way they will manifest themselves, but at the same time, there's a lot of commonality. And it's important for us to recognize the unique cultural strengths that communities can provide to youth in order to help them thrive. And as I mentioned earlier, factors like inequality, bias, and discrimination are also significant barriers to healthy adolescent development. So within this fundamental and classic and significant period of discovery and learning, how can we break this down to thinking about key developmental needs of adolescents? And this is something that we like to do in order to bring this general idea of discovery and change and opportunity to a small set of developmental needs that we can focus on and think about for each setting in which we place adolescents and how we can best meet these developmental needs within each of those settings. So I'm going to go through sort of a handful of these. The first thing that adolescence needs are safe and satisfying ways to take healthy risks and explore the world. If there's one thing, hopefully you remember there more than one thing from this talk tonight, but one of the most important things I think to come away with is the idea that risk-taking is all about learning. And there's tremendous amount of work done in cognitive science and done in neuroscience that taking risks, that means making a decision when you don't know the cost, when you might have to take on a cost, but you think there might be a benefit or reward. Taking risks is how we learn about the world. And adolescent development is all about the importance of taking risks so that they can learn about the world and explore the world around them. The important thing is for us to enable them to have safe and satisfying ways to take healthy risks that do not hurt themselves or do not hurt their communities. So these could be risks that they might take in order to try a new activity or a new sport or a new interest. It could be trying out for a play. It could be trying out for a team. It could be exploring different ways to solve a problem in the classroom. It could be trying out a new friend group or someone whom you're romantically interested, try and find out whether or not they're interested in you, or exploring a new neighborhood, or going to that new movie theater that's in another town but close by and you want to check it out, or learning how to drive. All of these things are important because they're fundamental to learning, because you take the chance, you take the risk, you get input from that risk, and then you learn. And part of that risk taking is sometimes you're going to fail. And the other exciting thing about the cognitive science and neuroscience work that's being done is that adolescents are particularly attuned to learning from failure. And the adolescent brain is particularly sensitive to responding to failure and inputting and updating its information and its responsiveness to additional information that it's going to take in the world. So it's really important for us for adolescents to have safe and satisfying ways to take risks and explore the world. During adolescence, we need positive and attainable ways to earn respect and social status. And so what's very interesting about adolescence, and what's been fascinating, is that this shows up in human work, it shows up in primate work, it shows up in work with other mammals and rodent work as well. And that is when mammals in particular hit adolescence, and this isn't just true for mammals, but I know the mammal work better, when we hit adolescence and when we hit puberty, and in particular, some of the hormonal changes that take place during puberty make us pay much more attention to where we fit into the world around us and what it takes to find our place in that world. It doesn't mean that we need to be the top of the heap. Most of the time, we don't want to be at the bottom of the heap, but we want to understand where we are in the hierarchy, where we fall, and those things are always going to change. But what's important to us is to earn respect and to have at least some sense of status. And that doesn't necessarily mean, again, that we have to be at the top. Even when we're, at any place in the social world, what we're looking for is a sense of respect based upon the role that we play in our world. It could be within your peer group, in the family, in the community. This really has to do with figuring out the role that you play. And it's as if you are parents in this room, or if you are youth yourselves in this room, we all know how attuned we are to very sensitive slights towards status during the adolescent years. We notice it very quickly. We want to respond to that. Sometimes we respond emotionally to that. But that's important. That's because it's very important for us to figure out here we are, where we belong. And it's important for us to have a sense of respect, as it is for all of us as we move throughout the lifespan into adulthood. We need avenues to develop a positive sense of personal and group identity. As I mentioned, this could be personal identity in terms of who you are, what you like, what your interests are. It could be group identity or social identity, as I talked about it earlier, in terms of your positive gender identity, your positive ethnic or racial identity, your religious identity, your community identity. We need positive ways to develop these kinds of these identities, which are fundamental developmental tasks of the adolescent period. We know we need warmth and support from parents and caring adults. It's important to mention this because many times there are some misconceptions of the adolescent period that when they move into the teenage years, they don't need parental support or they don't need parental or adult input. What they really need is continued support, but in a different way, where it's not necessarily thrown at them all the time. Sometimes it's for us to be a net to catch them when they fall. Sometimes it's to act as the ladder to help them climb that particular mountain that they're trying to climb, but they still need to do the climbing themselves. I don't have to go into much detail about this. I know most of you who are here on this webinar today already know this, and that's one of the reasons why you're here today. It's very important during adolescence to have the opportunity to make meaningful contributions to the world around us. This could be our immediate social world, among friends, among family, but it also is the importance of making a contribution to our schools, to our communities around ourselves, to our country, to our world. During adolescence, many times that's when we begin to become aware of pressing issues that are facing our society or our world. If you look at climate activism or political activism, it comes and emerges during the adolescent years. And that's because teenagers increasingly want to make a contribution. They want to have an impact upon the world. And it's important for us to provide opportunities for them to do so. And then finally, it's important, as we all know, for them to have high quality educational opportunities. I think we all know what these mean. These mean well-resourced schools, but they also mean within the schools, the kinds of opportunities that really tap into these unique developmental needs of adolescents. It's not just learning, it's about exploratory learning. It's about flexible learning. It's about playing a role in your learning, having agency in your learning. It's using your learning to make a contribution. So in some of your schools in which your youth attend or you attend yourselves, there's increasingly, hopefully, some use of what are called project-based learning. And many times you come up with a project to help your community or your school or the broader world. And by doing that, you learn about, many times these projects are to help the larger world. And by doing so, you learn about the science of climate change. You learn about the politics of climate change. You learn about it at multiple levels. You might learn about how you bring people together in order to bring about change. You may learn about legislative processes within the US government or at the United Nations, and so on and so on. So these are the kinds of high quality learning opportunities that we're talking about. So these are the key developmental needs, again, that are all of youth that we like to think about as these core needs that really tap into this importance of discovery, agency, learning during the adolescent years. So how can we go about leveraging this tremendous period of opportunity, meet these unique developmental needs of adolescents in order to promote mental health? So recently, my co-director and I, Adriana Galvan, and I wrote a comment for Nature in which we focused on this idea that young people need experiences that boost their mental health. In addition to treating mental health problems, in addition to responding to youth in order to discover and respond to youth who are in crisis, we need to provide them with experiences that boost their health in the first place. And a lot of these opportunities have to do with promoting exploration and discovery that I've been talking about throughout this talk. So here, I'm just going to touch on the key components that we think are particularly important for promoting mental health and for thriving youth. I've already touched upon these a little bit in the talk, but I'm going to spend a little bit more time on them, highlighting them, and perhaps give you some examples from unique studies. So they need healthy ways to try new things and to explore the world. One interesting and sad aspect of something like depression is that you lose the stimulation and the energy to engage with the world and to work with the world around you. You lose the energy to explore the world and to have some agency and to try to have an impact upon the world, because in many ways you feel that you're unable to do so. Providing youth with ways to explore new things and explore the world promotes the sense of agency, promotes the sense that you belong, promotes the sense that you could potentially have an impact, promotes the sense that you contribute, and allows you to engage with the world, that create the kind of positive mental health and tendencies, and could enable that level of positivity that can help youth to have that kind of frame of mind, that kind of engagement with the world, will, at the same time as they might be experiencing the challenges that could potentially put them into a spiral of depression or negative emotionality and so on. Now, again, what I'm not talking about here is treatment of significant depressive issues. What I'm talking about is the kinds of experiences that we can provide to youth right from the get-go, what we can do as families and peers and schools and communities. And it's not just upon the families, it's upon the schools and the communities themselves. So all of us to take a look at, are we providing them ways to explore the world and to try the world and learn about the world around them? They need opportunities to contribute to others. And so I talked about this a little bit just a couple of moments ago. But what we mean by this is the ability to have an impact and affect change upon the world around us, and particularly upon the social world around us. So these opportunities could involve the ability to help your friend who's having a problem. It could be an opportunity to contribute to the family or play a role in family decision-making. If you're going on a vacation, where are you going to go? Do they have a role in making that choice? It could be that within the school that you're part of the school government helping to make some decisions in the school. It could be within the classroom that you're working on a group project and you're contributing to that group in order to develop that youth project and bring that project to completion. What we're talking about here are ways that could be very small and subtle, or ways that could be larger and more dramatic. And what was really striking about adolescent brain development, social development, and psychological development is a lot of it seems to be really focused on the importance of adolescents' need to contribute. This is something that I and some of my colleagues here at UCLA spent a lot of time working on. We look at the neuroscience of it, we look at the psychological development of it. But what's fascinating about this is a couple of things. One of them is that the very same brain networks and regions that are involved when you receive a reward for yourself tend to be engaged when you do things for other people. And we see this emerge during the adolescent years. The other thing is that many times when we think about the kinds of things that we need psychologically, many times we think about the need for support, which is important, the receipt of support from others. But what's fascinating is that there's a lot of science to suggest that when we support other people, we also benefit psychologically. When we do things for other people, we get positive psychological benefits. So increasingly, a lot of people are paying attention to this idea that it's very critical to provide adolescents with opportunities to contribute to other people. And frankly, again, I'm not a clinician, but there are some aspects of cognitive behavioral therapy that's called activation therapy in order to get those who are suffering from depression out there into the world, oftentimes involves volunteering and doing things for other people so that they can benefit from the rewards and the psychological rewards, or what sometimes is called the warm glow that we get from charity and from helping other people. As I mentioned before, we need healthy relationships with parents and other caring adults. I've already talked about the importance of that. The nature of that caring, the nature of that support obviously is going to change from childhood. It's going to be different for a 10-year-old than it is for a 15-year-old, than it is for a 20 and a 25-year-old. And as a parent of boys in their mid-20s myself, I know that it is one of the hardest parts of parenting is to adjust the way in which we provide support to our children. And in many times, as I mentioned, I just feel that we increasingly are moving to a point where we're just sort of no longer in their face, no longer providing constant suggestions, but increasingly becoming that ladder, becoming that net, becoming that scaffold that helps them to get to where they need to be. There are also a lot of very good programs out there, parenting support programs, very effective intervention programs that have worked with parents and families who are having struggles in order to work on communications and to figure out the way in which to provide the most support. It's not just upon the parents. Many times parents cannot do this for themselves when they are facing struggles, but there are many good programs out there that can support this. In that nature commentary that I mentioned, we cite a couple of those. And on our website, as I'll mention at the end of our talk, we have a lot of content out there that provides some examples of the kind of research that's been done to provide supportive evidence for the importance of these kinds of interventions. And then finally, I can't end this talk or get near the end of this talk without talking about the importance of healthy sleep. This, again, is something that we talk about in this Nature paper that I talked about earlier. Adolescence is a time of very critical learning, challenging learning, learning about who yourself, learning how to regulate your emotions, learning the complexity of social relationships, figuring out the challenges and the stresses of gradually becoming an adult. This important learning, that's both academic learning, cognitive learning, but also very significant emotional learning, requires regular and sufficient sleep. There have been all kinds of studies talking about the importance of sleep for learning. There have been experimental studies sort of either depriving people of sleep or giving them enhanced sleep. And it shows that the brain responds to that. The regions of the brain that are involved in social and emotional learning will respond to healthier and sufficient sleep and regular sleep. And that will enhance learning over the night and over the week and over the longer period of time. This is very critical during the adolescent years. If you are in the state of California, you know that there's a new state law that has changed school start times to be at least 8:30 for public schools. Most scientists believe that is a smart move. Sometimes they would like to even be later. It's interesting that most secondary schools in Europe start at 9 o'clock. But this is a really critical aspect of adolescent development for them to get regular and sufficient sleep. If you and your youth are finding that you're unable to get that, then it's important time to talk to your pediatrician, your clinician, or talk to your school about the ways that you can manage that. But we need to think about how we can get youth the amount of sleep that they need. And it's not just the teenager's fault. And again, if there's and second important thing for you to come away with, sleep difficulties among adolescents are oftentimes not their fault. It's a fundamental developmental change to want to go to bed later and to want to wake up later. It is a maturational change. It has to do with the changes in our circadian rhythm. As we go through the teenage years, we simply need to go to bed later and to wake up later. When we move into our 20s, it starts shifting back earlier. And this is something that we need to work with as families and as schools and communities in terms of whether we are providing adolescents with opportunities to get enough sleep, even if they want to get enough sleep. So to just sum it up, I think what we're really talking about here is supporting this wondrous age of opportunity. It's an opportunity to learn, to discover who we are. Our brain seems to be set up that way. We think the science is pretty darn good in terms of telling us the kinds of things that they need and the kinds of ways that we can support those needs. And it's an important thing to come away with that by meeting these core developmental needs, we enable them to make a successful transition to adulthood, but they also increasingly can become a force for good in their communities and for the larger society. So it's a win-win for the youth, and it's a win for our communities as well. So just to close, I just want to tell you a little bit more about our Center for the Developing Adolescent. This is one page from our website. The final slide I'll show you will have that information available. As I said, our focus is on translating and disseminating the science of adolescence. We have been around for a couple of years. We're developing a lot of great content. We increasingly will be adding more and more to our content over the next couple of years. We have a wonderful team of scientists called the National Scientific Council of Adolescents who are from around the country. We have a wonderful youth group of a Youth National Scientific Council that help to contribute to the work that we do. We have a podcast. We have infographics that are available that could be useful to you or to your communities or to your organizations. As I mentioned, we have this podcast that is hosted by Ron Dahl, who is at Berkeley, who is a member of our center here at UCLA. He is actually the founding director of the center before he came to UCLA. And we have increasingly have some information about the mental health, how we can best support the mental health of youth. And a lot of what I just talked about for the last 40 minutes are summarized here in this one pager, if you want to get to that a little bit later. So I'll end there. I'll close it. I'll sort of end with this final slide. This is our website. We're on Instagram and on Twitter. We're relatively new there, so we're starting to develop a lot of our content and pushing it out there. And if you're interested in learning more about us, we encourage you to take a look. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fuligni, for the wonderful presentation. So now we are opened up the Q&A session. Okay, the first question. Any research about psychological effects caused by being exposed to pornography websites in the teenage years?
I can't speak to that. I'm not familiar with it. There may be work on that. I think there is increasingly, I can give you what I sense is the concern. One of them is, just like anything else, if it's taking time away from other healthy and positive things that they could be doing in their lives, that could potentially be a problem. If the kind of pornography that they see is exploitative, involves violence, power assertion, that's not necessarily teaching them positive sexual health, I probably have to stop there. I can't speak to any other evidence. It really is a matter of what is being seen and how often and whether it's getting in the way of other positive ways to learn about sexual health.
Okay. Next question. Is brain growth constant or at different speeds throughout early, middle, and late adolescence?
That's a really fascinating question. It's great. I don't think that we talk about it being faster or slower at different stages of adolescence. What we can talk about is there do seem to be different times for different regions and systems of the brain that will grow more rapidly at certain times versus others. One thing that is happening during the adolescent years is there's particular growth in the prefrontal cortex area and the connection between those areas and the more midbrain regions and the regions that tend to be more inside the brain that focus on emotionality, reward, and motivation. So when I talked about reward and motivation areas being active, I'm talking about activity. I'm not necessarily talking about growth. Those regions of the brain, in terms of their growth, have gone through much of their physical growth before the adolescent years. But in terms of the refinement of the connections within those regions and within those regions and other regions of the brain, that's really what's happening during the adolescent years.
Okay, great. Next question. How are brains involved in developing our identities in adolescence?
So really fascinating question, isn't it? So what's interesting about the developing brain, and many of you know that there are different networks in the brain that are that tend to be more responsible for some functions than for other functions. And I'm saying it that way because I don't want you to come away with thinking that this one spot of the brain only does one thing. All regions of the brain will do multiple kinds of things. But there are some networks in the brains that seem to be particularly responsible for social cognition, that is thinking about other people and also thinking about ourselves. Those regions tend to be in the parietal areas and the temporal areas, which are right around here in the cortex, and also in sort of the medial prefrontal cortex. And they start to connect to one another during the adolescent years. And it's fascinating to see that these neural connections that seem to be responsible for thinking about yourself and other people are also happening at the same time as when you're figuring out your own identity and how you belong and fit in with other folks.
Right.
It's an important part of adolescence.
Yes, yes. Wondering if there's a research demonstrating not knowing the positive features of adolescence by adolescents themselves, especially the helping of others, could benefit their health?
So these are awesome questions. They're fantastic. So there has been interesting research. So I'm going to broaden the answer a little bit. We all know stereotypes about adolescence, negative stereotypes of adolescence, being selfish, what have you, not thinking about other people, blah, 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 blah. I hope I have showed you how these are just stereotypes. There's really no evidence behind it. But when adolescents themselves believe in those stereotypes during the teenage years, they are less likely to develop positive psychologically and behaviorally. They're more likely to engage in risk behavior and so on. So the take-home message here is that when we as a society engage in using stereotypes to describe adolescence, we are probably hurting many of these adolescents themselves by throwing these stereotypes at them. Think of it as stereotyping about race or gender or age. It's never positive for the targets of those particular stereotypes. And there is evidence that it's not good for the youth themselves.
Okay. Dr. Fuligni, can you please stop sharing the screen?
Yeah,
so
happy to do so.
Then audience can see you clear. So next questions. What do you do if high school kids don't want to talk to their parents?
I think if it's a long period of time over which this is happening, then I would try to seek advice from your pediatrician. Try to seek advice if you're a member of a faith community to talk to them. Many faith communities spend a lot of time providing services to families and to teenagers. And to work through, and perhaps if you can get some additional help to figure out what the unique issues that are happening. I can't speak to that particular situation. It's every situation is unique when this may be happening. If it's only over a short period of time or a few days or a week or so, but if it's extending on a period of time, then that's the time to try to get some help.
Okay. Next question. It looks like more and more teenagers are having depression. Are there studies on the long-term effect of antidepressant treatment on teenagers?
Not that I'm aware of. That's a good question. It is a question that's coming up in the medical community. I know I've seen it bubble up a little bit, but I can't speak to it. I don't think there's a lot of research on it yet.
Okay.
But I would defer to a different expert on that.
Okay. How do I help my 11-year-old to enjoy learning as opposed to learning to get good grades?
I think it's the question of the kinds of learning that they may be exposed to or having. Try to find out the kinds of things that they're interested in and to try to embed learning activities and experiences within those kinds of things. I mentioned a little bit more about project-based learning. It takes time. Schools try to do it. Sometimes they don't have time to do it. But when you have a project and then you learn different things about the world, but chemistry, biology, sociology, psychology, by trying to work on that project or solve that problem, many times that's particularly motivating for youth. So I think the question would be, what are the kinds of learning opportunities that they're having in the school? What kinds of learning opportunities might they be able to have at home, or kinds of activities? Try to find out the kinds of things that they're interested in.
We have also some pre-submitted questions. Let me pick up one of this. How to help teenagers to establish healthy relationships with computer and games?
That's a great question. I think it's a negotiation between the teenager and the parent. I think it's a question of, is it getting in the way of other things that they could and should be doing? It doesn't mean not to engage in the computers. It doesn't mean not to engage in the game use. It could be starting off with a question and a conversation about, what do you get out of the game? What are you learning? Are you learning things? What are you doing from it? Why do you enjoy doing it? It could be that they're doing it with their friends, and it's a way in which they're interacting with their friends. And so one important thing is to unpack what the gaming experience is like and what they're getting out of it, and then have that conversation and have the conversation about, well, what other kinds of things that are important for you to be doing, and how can we fit them in as well? You could talk about ways to have an agreed upon time range in which you do these kinds of things. It's probably better to try to establish these things earlier on in our adolescence than later in adolescence, when it would be increasingly difficult to try to sort of figure out how much time they're going to spend on a computer. It could be thinking about other kinds of games that would provide other kinds of opportunities to them as well.
Okay. Next question, any relevant theories that describes the language development during adolescence? How can we put into practice improved acquisition?
I assume you're talking about second language acquisition. Is that
language,
what
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Earlier is better. I mean, as we all know, I think earlier is better. That's number one. But number two, what's really important for language acquisition is functional use of the language. And that means not just sort of school-based or lessons, but actually having to use it in everyday life. That's when we really learn language the most, in order to get what we need, to get along with people, to meet people. That is really what, so work on ways that they can functionally use it in their everyday life.
Okay. So I wonder how adolescents explore differently online and offline. How could we support them in the digital world?
Could you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
I wonder how adolescents explore differently online and offline. How could we support them in this digital world?
That's a great question. There is a lot of exploration that is going on in the digital world. Increasingly, it's amazing. I don't know if you've experienced it with your youth, how much they know about the world today is so much more than we knew when I was growing up. And I think having discussions about what they're learning online, talking about it, what kinds of things you're looking at, not from a monitoring standpoint, but so that you can learn. Actually, have them teach you what they're learning online as well. Actually, that is, I can't say that we kind of stumbled upon that strategy for our teenage boys when they went through the teenage years, when we discovered just how much they were learning, and they were getting information that we didn't even know. So we tried to introduce that into the conversation. And in many ways, you're kind of triggering that benefit of contributing, right? They're contributing new knowledge to the family that they have and that they're going to share with you, and you can have that double bonus. So I think the best way to explore it is to find out what they're looking at, think about what they're doing, talking about what they're learning, and tell them that you want to learn. You want to, or actually ask them to help you learn about something online, and that's something that they might be able to do for you.
Okay. Great. So next question. What are some factors that may make adolescents less likely to seek help for mental health concern comparing to older adults?
What might make them less likely to share their concern?
Yeah, to seek help.
Oh, to seek help. What are the factors that would seek help? One thing that is important, and I know your foundation is doing this as well, is to decrease the stigma. And it is still a stigmatizing thing for many people. And one way could be to normalize discussions of feeling sad and the importance of getting help, or that sometimes if you are feeling sad for a long period of time or are so anxious it's preventing you from doing things, that in many ways we should be thinking about, just like we would think about a physical health problem, that we're sick and then we want to go to the doctor, or we need some medicine, or we have the flu, and we need to do this, we need to do that. Normalize the discussion of mental health, make it less stigmatizing. I think that's one of the biggest factors that would prevent adolescents from talking about it.
Okay. So, Dr. Fuligni, can we have 2 more questions?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Sure. So for adolescents with autism who camouflage their autistic symptoms, there's research that they experience higher levels of anxiety and depression. What would be some advice or formal support for this population?
That's a great question. Again, I'm going to have to defer. There is a center here at UCLA called CART, the Center for Autism Research and Treatment. Okay. They have some resources that are available there. It's CART, C-A-R-T, if you just Google UCLA CART. Mm-hmm. There are also regional centers. These are state-based regional centers that provide support for atypical children and youth who may be including autism, and may be facing them challenges. They provide resources. And then there are a bunch of national organizations that support families whose members are on the spectrum as well. So I encourage you to look at those. But it is an issue. Anxiety is something that will go along with autism. It's not uncommon.
Yes. Okay. How about last question? Sure. What daily mental hygiene do you recommend to maintain good mental health? I think it's for both adolescents and adults.
Sure. Regular sleep. And it's important to not just think about the amount. And so I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk about this, because our body is very attuned to our sleep rhythms. Any of you, and I think many of you probably travel quite distant sometimes, know about jet lag. If we are varying the times at which we go to sleep and wake up dramatically during the week, we are putting our system in jet lag again and again and again. So it's not just the amount of sleep, it's regularity. And trying to be roughly similar in terms of the time that we go to bed and the time they wake up is one of the surefire ways in order to have healthy sleep. That's not to say that we need to make our teenagers wake up at 7 a.m. or 6:30 a.m. or whenever they're getting up for school every day on Saturdays and Sundays every day. I think that's inhuman at a certain level. But sleeping till noon on Saturday and Sunday is a problem, because then they're shifting their clocks again. It's the same thing for all of us. To sleep healthy, an important key thing is to try to keep the bed as a sleep-only place. So a lot of times we want to do work or watch TV in bed, and our bodies are incredibly in tune to sleep cues in the environment. And what the bed is like is an important sleep cue. If it learns that the bed is a place to go to sleep and to rest alone, then that will also help sleep. I mean, I think the other healthy habits clearly have to do with some kind of exercise, not eating too late at night, eating healthily. But one important thing about eating is not eating too late at night, because that can also disrupt your body sleep, because your body temperature has to go down a little bit in order for you to go to sleep. And if it's digesting food, it's not going to be more easily to go down and enable you to sleep. I could go on and on about sleep. I spent a lot of time studying sleep during the adolescent years, but that's probably one of the best things you can do.
That's a great information to share with us.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Fuligni, for sharing your knowledge with us. And thank you, everyone. So we are going to end this webinar, and we hope to see you again on December 7th for another webinar with Dr. Laura Mofson on the topic of the adolescent adaptation of interpersonal psychotherapy for depression. And please take a moment to fill out our short survey. I will leave the donation QR code for a few more minutes. And we have an anonymous donor who will match your donation dollar to dollar up to $1,000. And thank you for donating to support mental health. With that, I'm closing the webinar. And thank you, Dr. Fuligni.
Thank you.
Everyone, goodbye, and take care and stay well.